My buddy John Jones has had this car for many years. I've known John for a long time, and when I saw this car at some point, just like his wagon, I told him, if you ever sell this car, you got to give me dibs on it. Well, one day, that day came up, and he asked if I wanted to buy it. He gave me a really good price on it, and I bought it. The car was buried at his place behind a bunch of other cars inside of a shop. So for the longest time, I couldn't really bring the car home because you'd have to move 20 cars to get to it. He finally moved. He dragged the car over to his place, and just recently, if you recall, if you watch my channel, I had an orange 72 Dodge D100. It was had a shortened rear end, it was tubbed, pretty badass truck, but John also sold that to me for a good price, and I hadn't had the money to give to him, so I hadn't paid him yet, and we got hit with a bunch of crap to do with the house, that we had to do some repairs due to a water leak, blah blah blah. Anyway, he was talking about trucks, and I asked if he wanted his truck back, and basically said yeah. So he took his truck back and he brought the car over to get it out of the way. So that's why it's finally here. So it's a 440 Magnum 4-barrel car, automatic transmission. I'll show you. 70 XS29 RT Charger. And as you can see, most of the rear of the car has been cut away. So the guy that owned the car before John had John do all of this. It was actually a complete car, and he wanted to build a Pro Street car, and so it got underway as a project. So anyway, the car got to this point, and then the guy who owned the car, he decided to go with a CUDA. So he went with a 70 CUDA, so switched paths. So John ended up taking this car as payment to do work towards the CUDA. So that's how John ended up with it. So here's the funny part of the story. See these fenders? These fenders don't belong to this car. You can see it's got some rust. They're green, more rust, kind of banged up. I've had those fenders forever, and I gave them to John because John wanted to clone this car into a Daytona, and so you need 70 fenders to make it into a Daytona. They're not in the greatest shape, although these days you can't really find them, and when you do, they are a ton of money. So, but where those fenders came from is the funny story. So a very, very, very long time ago, I was probably like 14 years old, and my dad had a house up in Northern California, Sacramento, that he rented out, and every freaking tenant he had was a piece of trash. Basically, every time somebody came in and rented the house, they trashed the house. They would leave trash in the yard. I mean, it was like pretty much every single tenant. Bad neighborhood, maybe, I don't know, whatever it was. But anyway, we were friends with the neighbors across the street. This is actually when I was born in Northern California, in Sacramento, and that was the house that we lived in till I was 5 years old. Then we moved down to Southern California. But anyway, we'd been friends with the neighbors across the street. So the tenants moved out. The neighbor across the street told my dad that they left a car in the yard. So 14 years old, I'm thinking, I need a car, right? And the car had been stripped. But at any rate, on the drive to Northern California, I asked my dad if I can have the car. And he says, oh, you know, it's probably junk, you don't want it, blah, blah, blah. No, we're just gonna get rid of it, da, 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 da. So I kept badgering him, and I said, well, what if the car is a Charger? I said, if the car is a Charger, can I have it? Now, it's 1,000,000 to 1 that some random car is left in the yard by the tenants. In fact, the car was left in the yard, turned upside down on its roof, in the front yard. The neighbor across the street could see this. The odds have got to be astronomical, right? My dad says, fine, if it's a Charger, you can have it. Thinking to himself, there is no way in hell it's a Dodge Charger. And when we pull into the yard that night, after like a 10-hour drive to Northern California. What's in the driveway or next to the driveway, upside down on its roof? A 1970 Dodge Charger. We actually loaded the car up, what was left of it. It was literally just the shell, and those fenders were like the only panels on the car. We loaded it on a trailer and drug it home with us to Southern California. That car sat in the yard for a while, in my dad's yard for a while. Pulled the fenders off of it. Maybe they were off, I don't remember. I think we might have pulled them off to put it on the trailer, because I don't think the trailer was a car trailer, so to make it a little shorter. So at some point, my parents had a field fire come through their property, and it torched a bunch of cool cars, unfortunately. My 70 had already caught fire and burned, was in the yard. I'd already stripped it, so it was just a shell. I so wish I kept that thing, and I so wish I kept that other 70, but some scrapper came in, and basically my dad just let him take all the torched cars that were burnt to the ground. So I didn't get to keep much, you know. Those fenders were away from the car, so they didn't burn. But anyway, that's the story of those fenders. If you got any cool classic car stories like that, put them in the comments. I'd love to hear them.